Alrighty, welcome everyone. I missed you all last month. I'm glad to be back. For our first time attendees, my name is Sydney Enns. I'm the Director of Volunteer Engagement at the Tennessee Department of Disability and Aging. I'm trying out our new department name, so I hope it sounded good how I said it. So many of you in Tennessee, I know we have some visitors from outside of Tennessee, but for those of you in Tennessee who know, our agency, the Commission on Aging and Disability, is merging with the Department of Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities on July 1st. So we're so close to that finish line, and I'm just starting to test out that DDA title. So anywho, we've been doing this webinar series for 5 years now, and for our new attendees, all presentations from January 2020 to last month are posted on the Tennessee Commission on Aging and Disabilities YouTube channel if you're interested in checking out anything that we've done in the past. By the end of the day tomorrow, along with a follow-up email with any of the resources that Michelle was kind enough to share with us. I want to do my typical disclaimer that these webinars are being recorded. So please be sure to keep information confidential when we're talking about volunteers, clients, partners in the community, things of that nature. And now is the time to turn off your camera if you don't want to be recorded. And also please be sure to mute your mics so we reduce that background noise for our guest speaker. I do want to encourage you to use the reactions function to give our presenter feedback throughout the presentation and for you all to stay engaged in the discussion. So I want everyone to go ahead, take a minute, find your reactions, and tell me how you're feeling today. So your reactions are up there at the top, a big smiley face that says react. And I'm going to say, I'm feeling a heart today. I'm feeling good. Like today's a good day. We got some claps happening. So I just want to make sure everybody knows where that's at. It's also important to remember that everything we talk about on these webinars is not required for you to implement in your program. These are simply best practices through research and experiences. However, if you do like what you hear and want to implement a suggestion or strategy, which I'm sure Michelle is going to have many of those for us today, be sure to have the support of your supervisor or management before moving forward. Recognizing volunteers is always a topic that we love to hear a new perspective on. So I'm going to turn it over to our speaker to introduce herself and start our discussion. So everyone, please join me with the applause reaction that you just found a little while ago, and welcoming Michelle to the series. Michelle, thank you so much for speaking with our group today on such an important and valuable topic.
Thanks so much, Sydney. And hi, everyone. Good afternoon, good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. So excited to be with this group and really excited to kind of talk to you all about a topic that's near and dear to my heart, and that's recognizing our volunteers. I am the Strategic Director of Volunteer Engagement at the American Cancer Society. I've been with the American Cancer Society for 10 years now and started in more of our community fundraising, development income space, and then have been focused more on volunteer engagement since about 2016. So definitely for the bulk of my time here, really focusing in on volunteer engagement and just kind of different stages within that volunteer engagement life cycle and model. And I've had my hands really deep into some of our recognition work nationally, I would say for the last 4 or 5 years. And so again, just excited to talk to you guys about some of, best practices, some things that we've seen work for us really well behind, different strategies around volunteer recognition. But really just want to make sure that this is the time to ask questions, but also to have a conversation, to share best practices or maybe some gaps and hurdles that we're all seeing and hopefully learn from each other as well throughout this afternoon's presentation. I am based out of Columbus, Ohio. But I am from Florida, originally grew up, born and raised in Florida. And for everyone joining from Tennessee, I'm sure you all are very happy to see my beloved Florida Gators knocked out of the College World Series last night. Still definitely a little painful for us, but we're happy it's all in the SEC still. And again, with that, I'll kind of kick it off. But if anyone has any questions, please feel free to use the chat. I've asked Sydney to just graciously kind of keep an eye on things in case I glaze over any questions, but definitely want this to be interactive. Feel free to come off mute. And then there's definitely going to be a lot of time at the end for again, that Q&A, just some questions and so hopefully some really great dialogue as well. But before I dive into just kind of recognition and what are some strategies and ideas behind different levels of recognition, I think it's just so important, again, to think about the value of our volunteers, right? And so anytime we're trying to think about whether it's a recognition plan or a recruitment plan, there's sometimes dollars associated with that as well. And so, we sometimes need to work with our management, our executive leadership team to really think about the value of our volunteers and why they're worth the investment. And I mean, we all know that our volunteers are phenomenal human beings, and just what they bring to our day-to-day lives is just so spectacular. But from an organization standpoint, really being able to talk about the impact and even just that dollar value. So aside from all the qualitative, being able to make a difference in our mission and the impact that they make, they truly do bring, a quantitative dollar value to our organization. There's been some different studies and research around exactly how much of, a volunteer hour is worth. And this is kind of right here in the middle. Last year, the Independent Sector and Do Good Institute kind of came out with their own study, which showed that a volunteer hour nationally, kind of industry standard, was around $32 an hour. So if we multiply that through, all of our volunteers across our organization, in our different markets, in our offices, and how often they volunteer, we're talking about thousands of dollars that volunteers are kind of bringing into the organization, right? Money that we're not having to spend because our volunteers are able to support the mission, but again, just the value that they're adding to our organization. So I love kind of sharing this with folks because I think it really is kind of impactful. We don't always think about, money necessarily associated with our volunteers. We know that a lot of times our volunteers do end up being really great donors as well for our organization. But just again, being able to add that monetary value to their time and their support, I think is just such great resource and impact to be able to share. Again, when we're thinking about, sometimes we need to spend money to thank our volunteers, or we need to spend a little money to recruit more volunteers for our mission. So knowing that we're getting that ROI, I think is super impactful. And then when we think about why people volunteer, this is just a handful of reasons, kind of some of those top reasons why someone signs up to volunteer with an organization. I know we can all think of a dozen more reasons, but thinking about that connection to our mission. Here at the American Cancer Society, obviously, it's a lot of times folks sign up because they themselves have been a cancer survivor. They have a loved one who's been affected by cancer. So that connection to the mission is oftentimes the number one reason why someone kind of raises their hands and signs up to be a volunteer. Certainly that feeling of, I'm making a difference in the organization, I'm making a difference in my community, in my world. Or I just want to feel this sense of community, right? I want to be part of this larger group that's making a difference. I want to get engaged with folks in my neighborhood. So that sense of belonging to a greater purpose as well. Sometimes folks are just asked, hey, can you come help volunteer at my church's festival this weekend? Can you come help with the PTA? Things like that. Just a direct ask. You say yes. Maybe you can't say no to people, and that's kind of how you get involved. But what you don't see here on this list is recognition, right? People don't sign up because they want a pat on the back. They don't sign up to volunteer because they want a thank you card at the end of the day. But there is so much value in recognition. It may not be the why people sign up to volunteer, but it's certainly what keeps them coming back, right? It is certainly part of what their overall experience and engagement to our organization is like. They'll remember those thank yous, and maybe that's kind of what helps them spread the word about volunteering with your organization, and what encourages them to bring on their friends and families to get involved with your organization. So again, it's not, recognition is certainly not why people say, oh, I want to volunteer because I want to get a nice thank you gift at the end. But doing those little thank you touch points certainly affects how they kind of perceive that volunteer opportunity. So I want to talk about different levels of recognition, and this definitely varies from organization to organization, but I like to break it down here because I think it kind of just helps us think of different bite-sized pieces of recognition. You have that organizational level, right? So from an organization, those thank yous that might not come from me, Michelle, to my specific volunteers, but that are coming from the organization. The American Cancer Society is thanking our volunteers in general. Very obvious times of the year where you can include recognition are National Volunteer Week, which takes place in April each year. There are some phenomenal resources online to really help you just think about, some messaging around National Volunteer Week. Make sure that you're sending thank you cards or sending out a national note. A lot of times you can really engage your leadership as well, because this is something that nonprofits around the country are participating in. We usually tend to get a lot of, engagement from our senior leadership to say, post thank you videos, and really just have it be an opportunity to say thank you from our entire organization, kind of really make sure that they feel a part of the whole group, not just feel like they're volunteering for one individual. Another really great easy touch point is around specific holidays. So we love to always do something during Thanksgiving week, just to show our volunteers that we're thankful for them, right? We're grateful for their support. And these thank you touch points, one of the keys is we really do make sure that they are just thank yous. We are saying thank you so much. If we're able to share the impact that our volunteers have made, so you've provided X amount of meals, X amount of rides to patients. You've, helped us put on so many community events. Being able to share that and just say thank you is really impactful. We really work to make sure that those little touch points don't have the little donate now button on the corner that so many of our other communication pieces tend to have. And, we all know that giving and donating is such a priority for in the nonprofit space, but it's also really important to recognize that there's a time to just say thank you, and kind of leave it at that, to not have that additional ask at the end. And so that's something that I think we always really try to hone in on, especially when we have those organizational points, where it is coming from the entire organization. I also included social media just because this is something that can usually reach a widespread audience. It's something that we can post throughout the year. We can think about, different celebrations going on throughout the month or throughout the year, and kind of how does that relate to our volunteers? So things like Father's Day just happened. Can we send a little thank you post, thanking our volunteers this Father's Day have made an impact, and kind of just tying it to what's already going on in the world, right? And just making sure that we're thinking about the lens of saying thank you to our volunteers, given whatever's kind of happening in the calendar year. I put on this automated recognition. This is something that we are starting to introduce a little bit more in our organization. And it's just this idea of like, what are quick, easy wins that you can incorporate recognition, right, into your practice, into the organization. So we are really starting to dive into utilizing some of our technology tools to send automated messaging to some of our volunteers. And so just a little thing like a happy birthday. Thank you so much for volunteering. We appreciate what you do for our organization. We wish you have a wonderful birthday. It's just a little note to let them know that we're thinking about them, right? And this is something that we can kind of put into place as soon as they sign up to volunteer. If we're able to capture that information, we have their date of birth listed on their record, then it's just kind of slowly part of that automation process if they're in an active volunteer position. So that's been really helpful. I think it helps ensure that, if as we get down to the different levels of recognition of looking at staff partner, peer-to-peer, it kind of just helps, take off a little bit off of that local staff partner's plate. If they send out something on a volunteer's birthday, fantastic. We can't get too many birthday wishes, but at least that way they'll hear from our organization. They'll get some sort of a thank you note. And there's, not too much of a heavy lift from a staff perspective there. So that's been something that we've really been trying to incorporate a little bit more. We're also looking at kind of like anniversary messaging. So when someone's hit a year of volunteering, or we have a lot of patient serving rides, we can then go ahead and, or patient serving volunteer opportunities, once you've served 100 patients, you get a nice little automated thank you. So just kind of thinking about how can we plug and play, and some of that has been really helpful for us. And it's still something that I'll say that we are constantly just exploring and looking to see where there's more opportunity there as well. And then I wanted to add here national awards. This is something, in our world, we do it nationally, but certainly, I've been in other positions where it's, within the office at the end of the year, we have these yearly awards, annual awards, and just an opportunity to recognize folks. This can be things that are nominated by staff. These can be awards that are nominated by fellow volunteers. And we do things that are a little bit more program specific just because of how widespread our volunteers kind of net is. But even things like, the rookie of the year, your new volunteer of the year, someone who's really stepped up in their first year of volunteering and of participating. We'll have, some of the like leadership volunteer awards where it's someone who's really gone above and beyond, maybe been a mentor to other volunteers or has really done an exceptional job of bringing in additional volunteers. Someone who's really moved the needle in our organization priorities, or maybe a new initiative that we kicked off this year across the organization. And so being able to kind of just recognize them at the end of the year, we kind of call our end of year award season here. And so really being able to do that. And then what's so beautiful about that is through the nomination process, you always get these you get the submissions about, why so-and-so is such a great volunteer. And so we kind of selfishly use those stories to then throughout the year post that on our social media channels or post that in, email communications or newsletters that we're sending out. We'll spotlight some volunteers. Even if they didn't win an award, maybe they were just nominated for something, but we got to learn so much about what they do as a volunteer, why they started volunteering with us. And so we're able to kind of include some of that in other recognition pieces that we do throughout the year. Even if they don't, receive an award, we're able to highlight their story and kind of just say thank you and recognize them in different ways throughout the year after that. So we really loved having that awards portfolio just because, one, it gives us an opportunity to recognize those top volunteers, but it also helps us just even learn about some of the amazing work that our volunteers are doing across the country in different communities. And then we're able to kind of showcase that, like I said, in newsletters, different messaging boards in their areas, and just kind of like really spotlight them throughout the year as well. So that's been a really great feature that we've added in the last few years, and I would certainly recommend that. And then moving on to staff partner, I kind of go into this a little bit more in my next slide, but that's really your kind of one-on-one thanking your volunteers. It's those folks that are working with the volunteers that come into the office regularly, or maybe they manage the program that the volunteers are participating in. They kind of know a little bit more about that volunteer, so they're able to have a little bit more of a personal relationship with them as an individual. And kind of send those recognition touch points throughout the year. So I'll get a little bit more into what we can do kind of at that personal staff partner level. But I also wanted to touch in here is peer-to-peer. We don't always think, we think a lot of times we kind of have to take on everything about managing our volunteers and working with our volunteers as staff. But a lot of times, they want to hear thank you, or they want to collaborate with other volunteers, with other folks who are in their same position, giving their time to participate or to give back to a particular organization. And so we've really been doing a great job of trying to incorporate some of our volunteers to kind of spread the love among each other. So we have, volunteer leaders in different positions. We have a board of directors, but we also have area boards across, 50 different markets in the country. And so sometimes we'll try to see, how can they reach out to the volunteers in their market and say a quick thank you throughout the year, or, just kind of have these periodic thank you moments. We'll see if they can have, stationery of their own that they can send thank you cards to some of the volunteers in their markets. Maybe there's a particular event that got them started as a volunteer for the organization, and so they want to send a thank you to all the volunteers now participating with those events today. So we've really done a great job. A lot of times to the beneficiaries of your mission. So in our case, cancer survivors or cancer patients, we'll send thank you messaging, or we'll have someone post on social media, a thank you to your volunteers. Because of you, I'm able to get to my cancer treatment. Because of you, I'm able to stay, at a Hope Lodge for free lodging. So really just, I think that can be super impactful when they hear from folks who are benefiting from the organization's mission and just hear a thank you from them. I think it really takes that, feeling of giving back, of making a difference, it really just like takes that to a whole new level. So thinking about incorporating those folks and some of the thank you messaging as well has been really impactful. And like I said, just fellow volunteers, just being able to hear a quick thank you from their peers, being able to feel seen and recognized from their peers who are also giving work, who are giving of their, their spare time to the same organization, to the same cause, the same mission. That's been super impactful as well. And then, like I said, wanted to dive a little bit more into that staff partner, right? So that's some of the stuff that we can do one-on-one with our volunteers that are participating right here in our markets, that are participating with the programs we oversee. One of the things that we always tell our staff, whether they're just starting out at the organization or they've been here for years, is to talk about recognition when you start working with a new volunteer. We have what we call this volunteer staff partnership toolkit, and it really talks about just establishing that partnership with your volunteer as an individual. So it goes through everything about talking about like roles and responsibilities for the volunteer, kind of what they're going to be responsible for, talking through some different training materials that can be available to them, what some expectations are, communication, things like that, kind of setting accountability with that volunteer. But we always say, be sure to include recognition in that conversation. So really understand, how does your volunteer like to be recognized? So I put here, learn your volunteer's love language. Is it something where they really want to make sure that, some folks want their story to be shared. Some folks just want to hear, I just want to keep track of what difference we're making at the organization. I just want to be really involved in, receive communication pieces about what impact we're having on the organization, a simple thank you card, or, just really learning what's going to make your volunteer feel loved and appreciated. I think having that conversation at the beginning and just kind of making a mental note of, Susie prefers this, just great ideas of how to really make sure that you're kind of catering that recognition a little bit to that individual, while still making sure that it's manageable, right? Without kind of, okay, I have this whole, different recognition plan for every single person that volunteers, but at least kind of having some buckets that you can group folks into based on their feedback and their preferences. And schedule time for recognition. I think this sounds so simple and it sounds so, I think, redundant sometimes, but really we are so busy in our daily lives that sometimes we just need to schedule things out. We need to put it on our calendar to take time to recognize our volunteers. And so really just even once a month, blocking out some time on your calendar to write thank you notes, like give yourself that time so that you can ensure that, it doesn't go 3, 5, 6 months down the line and you're like, oh shoot, I haven't really sent any thank you cards yet, or I've been meaning to get around to that, but it just hasn't been a priority. I think making sure that we are prioritizing recognition and adding it onto our calendars like we would a meeting can be really helpful. It just really, I think, holds us accountable to blocking out that time to make sure that we really are thinking about those folks. A lot of times we recommend, blocking it on your calendar, making sure you have that time maybe once a month. And then throughout the month, you can add notes, or maybe there's certain volunteers that are going to be hitting a milestone that month, and put that into your calendar notes and say, okay, these are the specific folks I want to send thank you cards to, or this is what I want to thank people about. This is what I want to make sure to include. We had such great success at our shop this past year. I need to make sure we include that in the notes in my thank you cards, or even just a little email. We have a great recognition portal. It's internal, but I know you could definitely do this sometimes with emails. You can schedule out your emails as well. So if you have a lot of time where you're just sitting at the computer one day and you want to go ahead and schedule out some emails that are going to go out in, a week, 2, 3 weeks, go ahead and do that. Use your time to think about how you're going to recognize folks down the line, and you know that it's taken care of. And then this lift and shift resources, this is something that I think, we really try to make sure that we have like digital greeting cards in place that our staff can go ahead and just kind of take and like I said, lift and shift and use whenever they need. Messaging is something that we also try to have for our staff across the organization. So we'll have like little kind of pre-made social media posts or pre-made prompts that they can use in some of their thank you messaging. sometimes we'll have like little document one-pagers on how to create a quick thank you video on your cell phone or on your computer to send out to your volunteers. So kind of looking into some of those resources. If your organization doesn't have them, certainly looking online for just things where you can kind of plug in maybe like some of the more personalized information, but you're not having to recreate the wheel or create something from scratch. There's a lot of great resources out there where you can go ahead and, like I said, just like lift a greeting card off the and something that you can go ahead and send to your volunteers. But we really tried to do that. It really started in our organization. We were doing this for our donors. And so we kind of changed the messaging around so that it could be applicable, or we made it so that the messaging could be edited, where if you're sending this to someone who's made a donation, maybe this is some of the sample messaging you can include. Or if you're sending it to a volunteer, here's some sample messaging. But we'll also have kind of these resources of what are some of the fun holidays that are happening each month. And so our staff can kind of just look at that and say, oh, okay, I want to send, a thank you card on, XYZ holiday that's happening this month. And again, some of it is the more traditional Father's Day, Mother's Day, things like that, Valentine's, but then we'll include some of the fun holidays that people can kind of just make things a little bit more personal. And then certainly anything that's pertinent to our mission. So again, here we obviously have a lot of the cancer awareness months throughout the year. And so we'll try to tie some different recognition pieces. If you know that one of your volunteers is, a colorectal cancer survivor, make sure that you're sending them a thank you note and just kind of recognizing them for giving their time and just for being so connected to the mission. So just kind of making those little touch points, and again, scheduling those out really, really helps create accountability. And just helps us make sure that we kind of are doing the work and doing what we've talked about. Any questions so far on anything? I see Sydney has dropped in some beautiful resources in the chat too.
Yeah, I didn't have any questions come in. I'm very curious about the volunteer staff partnership toolkit that you mentioned, and I was personally and selfishly wondering if you wouldn't mind sharing that with me to show I can share it with everybody else.
Yeah, certainly. I can pull some of the stuff. Some of it's a little bit more internal HRE focused, but a lot of it is definitely just things that can be used as the best practice. But what essentially that is kind of a toolkit, and we find it great just because so many of our staff partners do work with volunteers, and this might be the first time that they're working with volunteers. Or even if they've worked with volunteers in the past, they're working with a whole new group of volunteers. Maybe it's a volunteer committee that's helping put on their breast cancer walk. And so the volunteers have been here for years, but now they're new to the position. And so what the toolkit does is it really does kind of walk through that whole volunteer life cycle of, okay, this is how to start recruiting volunteers. Or once you've recruited the volunteer, these are some of the conversations to start having with them. So again, kind of breaking down roles and responsibilities. So what am I as the staff partner responsible for? What are you as the volunteer responsible for? What are we going to be working on together? There's tips and tricks on just how to have like difficult conversations. There's things around how to even just set up some accountability. So, how often do you want to communicate with each other? Through what channel do you want to communicate with each other? Again, how do you prefer to be recognized? And even just the act of kind of like writing this all out, kind of signing off on it together, and just really creates accountability, which accountability is kind of a sensitive subject with volunteers because, these folks don't work for us, but yet we rely so heavily on them. They literally make our work happen. We can open our doors. They're managing our front desks. They're putting together our meals, things like that. So we clearly rely on them to get the day-to-day work done. But they don't have to be here. And they're also, we're not paying them to do a job. So I think that toolkit really just kind of helps have some of those conversations in there. And then again, that recognition is just kind of a piece of the overall partnership. But it's in there to help, staff ensure that they're taking the time to do that. But yes, I will definitely share that out. And really just, the whole message, everything that we've talked about today is just taking the time to say thank you. really makes a difference. So however that looks, whether that's writing those handmade birthday cards, whether it's just even pulling aside your volunteers and saying thank you. If you have, some of our volunteer opportunities are virtual, some are in person. If they're in person, just even hanging like a thank you banner during National Volunteer Week, making sure that they feel that appreciation. And kind of going back to what I said earlier about just saying thank you, making sure that it stops at that. It's not thank you and donate now. Thank you and sign up to participate at our event. Really just making sure that they understand that they are doing so much work volunteering for us, and we really do appreciate the support. And that there's not this additional expectation that they continue to give in a different way, that their volunteerism really is enough and is doing so much for our mission. So that's what I had today. Again, happy to go into more detail with examples and answer questions that you all have, but really wanted to see if there were other areas where folks had questions or have had maybe some hesitations or some issues around recognition, and just happy to have that conversation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Michelle. We did have a comment that people do handwritten birthday cards and anniversary cards. I just like the fun names that we come up with sometimes for the stuff that we do.
And I don't know about you guys, but I am sometimes blown away when I look at those anniversary cards too, to realize like, wow, folks have been helping us for such a long time. They really have such a commitment. So I think that's just a beautiful touch point as well.
Absolutely. And I love that everything you've talked about so far today doesn't really have to do with swag. Because a lot of people who I've talked to are just like, oh my gosh, what's the next thing I need to do? Do I need to do t-shirts? I did the mugs last year and I did umbrellas. Like, what else? I need new ideas of what to buy my volunteers. So I love that you didn't really mention that.
Yeah. It's definitely something I would say probably around the time of COVID and in 2020, we really went back on our swag. I mean, we used to have tons of swag for every reason, whether you donated this much or you participated in this, you volunteered for that. And we would get feedback from, you would have some folks that, man, that t-shirt meant the world to them, or God, that magnet was like the best thing on earth. But I would say the overwhelming majority, we also do an engagement survey with our volunteers each year just to kind of see, what keeps them going, what makes them tick, what kind of background, what feedback do they have for us. And the overwhelming majority, will say that they don't need that, especially if they are also donors. Like, they just don't want to see the money spent that way. They rather it go to the mission. If folks are volunteering their time to help us, they want to make sure that we're spending our money wisely as an organization, and that it really is truly going back to the mission that they are supporting. So yeah, I would say we've really honed back on our swag over the last few years. That doesn't mean we don't do it. I won't say that there are not, ACS sweatshirts and cups and things like that out there. There certainly are. But we really, I think, listen to our volunteers and just try to make it a little bit more personal when we can, and personalized when there's an opportunity to do that.
Definitely. We had a comment or a chat come in that someone recently recognized 3 volunteers who have over 35 years of service with their organization. That's huge. And Jessica, if you want to take yourself off mute and share your secrets with the group, we would love it.
Sure. I don't have that many secrets. I just actually started my role about a year ago. And I previously was not in volunteer management. I was a high school educator and an instructional designer before this. But I have taken over the role from a variety of wonderful volunteer managers before us. And we just have a lot of opportunities at my organization. I work in a museum, and we serve over 60,000 school students every year, and we just don't have a staff that can support that many students being in our building every year. And so the volunteers contribute a lot to those school groups. And we're working on bringing back tours. Part of that has been suspended as a result of COVID. So we've been on a 3-year hiatus, but we still wanted to recognize those as years of service. We didn't take those years off, even though they weren't actively serving due to COVID reasons. because they did stick around. When I started, we still have 65 people on my active roles, and I haven't done any active recruiting in my year. I've just been working on building the relationships with those that we have. So I think that speaks to a lot of the mission-driven work that has come before me.
Absolutely. Thank you,
amazing.
Jessica. Appreciate that. Anybody else have any questions, comments? Feel free to either raise your hand and I can call on you and you can unmute yourself, or just kind of chat with the group. I'm curious what some of you all did for National Volunteer Week. I was going to ask you all last month, but I wasn't on the webinar series. If we had any fun things happen in that week or month. Go ahead, Jessica. Take over the call.
So I hosted a luncheon for the volunteers. So I catered in a really big meal, and then I updated our years of service pin. So previously the volunteers received a pin, and then they got like a charm that could essentially act as like a tassel that went underneath. For some people, they really liked that because it showed like really easily their years of service, but I ended up switching the design where they're going to get a brand new pin each year. Part of that was I did this because our volunteers had not been receiving any new swag that had our new branding on it. Everything they had was our old logos and our old colors. So part of me thought it was important to recognize that they were worth it enough to give them the new branded materials. And then I did a celebration for the 3 volunteers who had the 35 years of service. We didn't tell them we were going to recognize them. We surprised them and recognizing them, and had our director come talk at the luncheon to recognize their service and highlighted how many hours they had, how many different areas of the museum they had touched through those service years that they had. And then that week I hand wrote everybody notes and mailed it out to them. And then those who didn't come, I mailed all of their stuff out to them with handwritten notes about their service to that point. And I appreciate that they have stuck it around with me as I rebuilt the program over the last year, and wrote some notes by looking at their years of service, and kind of gave them a highlight of what I thought was really wonderful about their time with the museum.
Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, Sydney, it's Stacy. We
Stacy, go
had
ahead.
a volunteer recognition this year where we did serve them lunch, but kind of an unanticipated, I guess, result was that we actually gained some volunteers that were already volunteering for one program. They didn't really know all of the services that we have here and the volunteer opportunities. So like for my ride, I gained some more volunteers for my ride that, you know, they wanted to volunteer for more than just one program. So we were kind of happy about that.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong. Don't you guys usually have a theme for yours? Like one year way back when, like maybe even pre-COVID, it was like superheroes.
We try to do something different every year. This year it was I can't remember the slogan that we used, but it was a fiesta. So we had it decorated like that. Last year, let's see, I think we did the cookout last year, like outdoor picnic. It works out really good for us to be able to do it outdoors. And we're growing so big now. It's just every year it just gets bigger and bigger. So yeah, it's fun.
Was it your group that did like the celebrity? It was like a movie star, and it could have been yours, it could have been somebody else's, but like they did a luncheon or a gathering with their volunteers, and their volunteers came in on a red carpet, and there was like photographers, and that was a really great way that they got actual pictures of their volunteers that they could use, and group pictures and stuff like that. Was that you all?
That was not us, but that's a great idea. I'll have to
Yeah,
remember
next
that.
year, use it.
Yeah, I like it.
Stacey, I love what you said about just even educating the volunteers in these recognition opportunities about other programs and other products within your company. I think that's such a great way. You know, we can talk about the impact that volunteers are making in other volunteer roles as well, but just kind of as a part of the organization. And I think that gets folks curious as to like, oh, I want to learn more about that. Oh, maybe that's something else I can do. And sometimes it kind of also helps folks who are maybe thinking about taking a step back in volunteering. They're like, well, maybe I don't want to continue in this current role, but I didn't know that you guys offered this. Let me see if I can get my feet wet over there as well.
Right. We had one new group. It was a couple that they really just couldn't get out to deliver meals. You know, getting in and out of the car was a little bit much for them. But they could do my ride. taking somebody to the doctor, it's a little, a little bit easier on them. So yeah, just using that opportunity and, letting them get to know the other volunteers. Some of them even found out that they had friends that were volunteering for one program they didn't know about. So yeah, a good opportunity.
Awesome. Thank you, Stacy.
Mhm.
Carol mentioned that she did her volunteer event luncheon gift live band. That's fun. And she was able to announce their service enterprise accreditation. And their theme was, "You're the core of our success." And they had apples all around. I like that. It sounds corny, but I love that kind of stuff, like the superheroes and the apples and all of that. Carol, if you don't mind, if you want to come off mute and talk about the service enterprise accreditation, give yourself some kudos for getting all that together. Some people's mic work, some people's don't, so don't feel any pressure if you can't come off mute.
Yeah, I'll share about it. Service Enterprise started with Points to Light, and now it is through ALIVE, the Association for Leaders of Volunteer Engagement. And it has 12 characteristics that are of a service enterprise organization. Service enterprise, if you're not familiar with it, is an organization that uses volunteers in every aspect, but it also, they are a thorough part of the organization, from the strategic planning to, a lot of people think of, oh, we should have a volunteer for that event like 2 days beforehand. Service enterprise is like a change in mindset that volunteers are an extension of the organization. They're staff that are not paid. And so when you think about, hey, we need volunteers for that event, it's part of the planning process, not an afterthought. And out of the 12 characteristics, you have to prove that you are doing those. And from start to finish, we started in April of 22, and we were able to announce in April of 24, our service enterprise journey was over. So it is not for the faint of heart, and it is a pretty in-depth thing. And if you're interested, check out the ALIVE website. They have a service enterprise page that'll explain it. And the reason we did apples was the theme of our service enterprise journey. When my colleague and I, we did the PowerPoint to explain service enterprise. And so we used the apple as our theme, that we have a lot of different programs at our agency, kind of like different apples or apple trees within an orchard, but we're all aiming for the same goal. And so apples, and our growth was by the apple and stuff like that. So our gift was apple butter made by a local vendor. We had apple desserts. We had 3 different kinds of apple desserts for as part of the event. And then we had apples on the table, apple questions, apple trivia. So yeah. And because we could not have did the service enterprise journey without our volunteers. So that was kind of the theme of it all.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. That's actually, I think, where you and I met, Carol, was with the ALIVE Presenters Bootcamp. So I'm glad that you're hanging out on this series with me too.
Yep.
All right. Anybody
and
else?
I'll shout out to ALIVE, because if you are not a part of ALIVE, you need to be as a volunteer engagement professional. It is the only national organization for people like us. We understand each other. And I am a little biased. I am on the board.
Yeah. ALIVE is amazing. We can talk about that for hours on end. Anybody has any questions on ALIVE, feel free to let me know. Happy to plug it as well. Go ahead, Sue. What you got for us?
Let me get back to our recognizing our volunteers. During National Volunteer Month, which is April, I write weekly articles for our community newspaper. And so all my articles in April have to do with volunteering. And one article may be the benefits of volunteering, how it can benefit the volunteer. Other articles are about, why you should volunteer, where you can volunteer. And then I usually do a little segment about each of our volunteers, why they are volunteering, how they got started, how many years. So give them some recognition, in the newspaper. And usually we also have pictures, take pictures, and they'll be in the newspaper also. And we also do, right now we've accumulated a lot more volunteers. So we have about 60 total volunteers now that only just deliver meals. And so I thought about now my weekly articles have a little section just, about one volunteer each week. And by the end of the year, I may, be able to cover all the volunteers. And but also in April during National Volunteer Week, we also always have a get together with the volunteers. Last year it was a catered lunch. Stacy got to come. This year we had a cookout for our volunteers, and we actually had to do it in two groups because, like I said, we have so many volunteers. And so that's something that everybody looks forward to. And we had a gift bag for each. And Amazon is a treasure house of volunteer gifts. And we got in their little goodie bag, we had cups and notebooks and pens and key rings and chapstick, and everything had little slogans about volunteering. And that was really, really neat to be able to give each one a gift bag. So we really, try to recognize our volunteers, especially during April.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Sue. And Michelle, I'm sorry, I kind of took over. This is your presentation.
No. This has been wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Okay, who else wants to share? I told Michelle this is not a shy group, so come on, everybody. But Michelle, I really liked what you talked about in terms of those touch points, because a lot of us think about birthdays and anniversaries primarily. But when you mentioned just like the number of the actual services the volunteer provides. So for ours, it would be things like, congratulations, you've served, 100 meals, you've given 10 rides, 25 rides, you've counseled, 20 people, you've saved a Medicare beneficiary X amount of money. Like those kind of things are the impact that I think our volunteers are looking for, that we need to look and try and be better at highlighting.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Who else? There's too many people for me to actually call people out. So you guys are lucky I won't do that. I always want to pick on the boys, on the calls, because we are a little bit of a female dominated industry. So if there's any gentlemen on the call who want to share a perspective, we would love to hear from you all. I tried. So real quick before we wrap up, and if we have a couple extra minutes, not a problem. Just want to remind you all that we have our next session of the series on, oh goodness, I know this. Oh, and thank you, Michelle, for putting your contact information up. Perfect. Now let me find my agenda. Oh goodness. I'm organized, I promise. Okay. July 18th. Jared Peer, who is usually on the call, I don't think he's on the call today. He will be talking to us about preventing burnout and encouraging self-care amongst your volunteers. So this one's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of self-reflection, as well as a lot of tips and tricks to help your volunteers out. So I hope you all will be able to join us next month. What I want to do is I want to thank Michelle, again, thank you so much for all this wonderful information and the resources, since you'll send a little bit more. I will have those all in the follow-up email, likely going out tomorrow. But Michelle, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate you. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. That way, if anyone has any questions or comments that they don't want to be recorded, we have a little bit of time that we can talk off recording.